They say a wedding is supposed to be the happiest day for a mother, but what if the very day you paid for, the day you dreamed of sharing with your son, became the day you were erased? This is not just another family drama. It's a story of betrayal, silence, power, and ultimate transformation. At my son's wedding, the bride sat me in the kitchen. I watched through a swinging door as strangers toasted with champagne I had paid for. Every flower, every chair, every ounce of celebration, funded by me but not meant for me. I smiled, I stayed quiet, and then, with one phone call, I burned it all to the ground. This is a story about family secrets, revenge served cold, and the shocking letter that revealed everything I thought I knew was a lie. It's a life-changing journey of heartbreak, strength, and rebirth. One that will leave you questioning, what would you do if the people you loved most treated you like you didn't matter? Stay until the end, because the twist, the justice, and the legacy I created will make your heart race. They say a wedding is supposed to be the happiest day of a mother's life, a moment where you sit front row, watch your son promise forever, and feel the weight of every sacrifice turn into pride. But at my son's wedding, I wasn't in the front row. I was in the kitchen, not at a decorated table, not next to family, not even on the edge of the room. No, they placed me on a folding chair with a paper napkin tossed across the seat, squeezed between a cart with a broken wheel and a stack of dirty trays. That was my place of honor. I sat there, smelling marinara and garlic, while laughter spilled from the ballroom just beyond the swinging door. Every time the silver edge of that door smacked against the wall, I caught a flicker of what I was missing: the chandeliers, the string lights, the music, and my son. My Daniel smiling so wide you'd think the world had been handed to him. Except the world hadn't been handed to him. I had built it, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. And yet, here I was, hidden like an afterthought. I remember looking down at my dress, a soft mauve chiffon, hand-stitched and chosen carefully. I'd spent 3 hours that morning at the salon, pretending this day would matter for me as much as it did for them. 3 hours of makeup, hairspray, and small talk I barely absorbed because my heart was already brimming with nervous pride. But when I arrived, no one told me about the other arrangements. No one said, "We thought of you, we saved you a seat." Not my son, not the bride, not her family. The catering manager, a boy who couldn't have been more than 20, shuffled awkwardly when he saw me standing there, clutching my little beige handbag, the one Daniel had bought me years ago on Mother's Day, back when he still called me Mama. He mumbled, scratching at his neck. "They said you're supposed to wait back here, ma'am." The bride didn't want, any visual clashes with the theme. Theme. That one word hit harder than the slamming kitchen door. I blinked at him, too stunned to answer. Visual clashes? With what? My age? My face? My existence? He winced, glancing at the swinging door like it might swallow him whole. Something about, consistency for the photos. Consistency. Photos. As if I were an old chair that didn't match the decor. I sat down slowly. The folding chair groaned under my weight, creaking like it too, didn't belong there. My shoes stuck slightly to the stained floor, the sticky residue of spilled gravy clinging with every shift of my feet. Someone dropped a plate in front of me, a cold piece of chicken, dry and unseasoned, on chipped porcelain. My freshly painted nails, soft pink, carefully chosen for this day, looked absurd against it, and I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't notice the insult, not because it didn't hurt, but because it was Daniel's day. I told myself, don't ruin it for him. Don't be that mother. So I smiled. I folded my napkin neatly across my lap like it was any other dinner. I dabbed at my lips, pretending there was something to clean when really, I was hiding the way they trembled. From where I sat, I could hear the toasts. Her mother's voice rose first, syrupy sweet and rehearsed. "Emily is so lucky. Daniel is the kindest man alive. He already feels like a son to us." Applause thundered, glasses clinked. My name wasn't spoken. I pulled out the ceremony program from my purse, my eyes searching desperately for even the smallest mention of me. The paper was elegant, cream cardstock with gold cursive, every detail curated to perfection. Her father's name, her mother's name, her siblings, her bridesmaids, and me? Nowhere. No speech, no mother-son dance, no seat of honor, just a ghost in the kitchen. Through the crack of the door, I caught a glimpse of their first dance. Daniel twirling Emily beneath the golden light, her veil floating like a dream. He looked radiant. He looked in love. He looked everywhere but at me. My eyes stung. I pressed the napkin against them, pretending it was onions from the kitchen, pretending it was steam, not betrayal. But the truth? It was betrayal. Pure and sharp, like a fracture you don't see until the glass finally shatters. I stared hard at the peeling paint behind the fire extinguisher on the wall in front of me. That small patch of decay became my anchor, my lifeline. Because if I let myself cry, if I let myself feel everything in that moment, I knew I might never stop. So I sat in silence. I watched from the shadows. I swallowed humiliation bite by bite with every scrap of food I couldn't taste, and I smiled because they thought they had erased me. But what they didn't know was that the woman they tried to bury in the kitchen wasn't gone. She was only getting started. The music grew louder on the other side of the swinging doors, each beat like a reminder of where I wasn't. Guests cheered, silverware clinked, and champagne fizzed into crystal flutes, while I sat on a folding chair staring at a chipped plate with food I couldn't bring myself to touch. I pulled the program from my handbag again, smoothing the cream-colored cardstock with trembling fingers. Elegant calligraphy spelled out every detail of the evening. Who walked Emily down the aisle? Who gave speeches? Who toasted the couple? Who danced? My eyes scanned every line, desperate for proof that I mattered. But my name wasn't there, not once. Her father had walked her down the aisle. Her mother gave the first speech. Her siblings introduced the bridal party. Even distant cousins were mentioned. And me? The woman who had raised the groom, the woman who had stayed up through nights of fevers and asthma attacks, the woman who had paid for this entire spectacle, I was a blank space. It hit me like ice water. I wasn't just forgotten, I was erased. A roar of laughter spilled into the kitchen. The swinging door flew open just long enough for me to see the head table glowing under the chandelier. Emily's mother sat there in navy chiffon, dripping pearls as if she had been born into royalty. She laughed like she owned the night. And next to her, Daniel smiled, his face glowing, leaning into her embrace as if she were the one who had raised him. The door slammed shut again, and I was left with nothing but the smell of garlic and steam. I pressed the napkin to my lips to hide their trembling. If I bit down any harder, I would draw blood. Then came the speeches. Her father's booming voice filled the reception hall. To our daughter Emily and her perfect new husband Daniel. May their future be forever bright. The crowd erupted in applause. I sat frozen, my body heavy, my throat tight. The man who had just toasted my son had barely spoken to me, except to remind me how admirable it was that I'd raised Daniel alone, as if my entire motherhood were a footnote of perseverance. Then Emily's mother took the microphone. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with fake warmth. We are so blessed to welcome Daniel into our family. He feels like a second son already. The applause grew louder. Cheers filled the air, but there was no mention of me, no thank you, no acknowledgement of the woman who had made it all possible. Not a word. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron. And then it was Daniel's turn. My son, the boy I had once rocked to sleep with lullabies, the boy I had stitched Halloween costumes for, the boy I had believed would always see me, stood in front of the microphone in his perfectly tailored suit, grinning with the confidence of a man who believed this was the happiest day of his life. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he said, his voice strong, polished, rehearsed. "Emily, you've made me the happiest man alive. To your family, thank you for welcoming me as your own. I feel so at home with you all." The words stabbed sharper than any knife. He thanked her family, he thanked her parents, he thanked the guests, he thanked everyone, but not me. Not the woman who had worked double shifts so he could have braces. Not the woman who had gone without new shoes so he could have the pair he wanted. Not the woman who had written every check for this wedding, from the hand-calligraphed invitations to the neon sign that glowed behind him now. I was invisible. The servers clapped politely, the guests roared, and I sat silent in the kitchen. Someone slid a slice of cake in front of me, vanilla with raspberry filling. Her favorite. Not mine, never mine. I had never liked raspberry, and my son knew it. I remembered his 10th birthday when he asked for chocolate cake with sprinkles. I had worked 2 extra shifts to buy it. He had hugged me so tightly that day, his little arms squeezing me like I was his whole world. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man who didn't even remember to save me a seat. I set the fork down. My hand was steady now. My tears had dried. What remained was something else, something heavier, something sharper. Through the crack of the swinging door, I caught another glimpse of the party. Emily twirled in Daniel's arms beneath golden lights. Her veil shimmered, her smile wide. Guests toasted, laughed, danced. She turned her head just enough to catch sight of me through the gap. Her eyes locked on mine. And then she smiled, not nervously, not apologetically, but smugly, calmly, like I was exactly where I belonged. And she turned away. That was when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. They hadn't simply forgotten me. They had chosen to erase me. And Daniel had let her. A quiet fire lit inside me. Not grief, not disappointment, but rage-controlled, cold, devastating. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I didn't demand a seat at their table. I simply sat back in my folding chair, in my mauve chiffon dress, clutching the handbag Daniel had once given me when he still loved me. And I smiled, because they thought they had silenced me. But they had no idea what silence can do when it finally decides to break. The last bite of cake had barely been served when I made my decision. Not loudly, not with tears or accusations, but quietly, like slipping a knife between ribs. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady for the first time all night. 3 calls. That's all it took. 1 to the florist. Cancel tomorrow's brunch arrangements. Do not deliver. 1 to the band. The second half of your performance is no longer required. 1 to the bar manager. Please scale back post-reception services. Do not process the final payment. Short, polite, final. By the time the guests were loosening their ties and the champagne was running low, the wheels were already turning. The next morning, there would be no flowers, no brunch, no extra music set, no endless cocktails, and no explanation. I slipped my phone back into my handbag and leaned against the cold plaster wall of the kitchen. The sound of laughter from the ballroom poured in like water through cracks. Toasts continued, glasses clinked. Someone shouted for the band to play something upbeat. Let them celebrate, let them dance, let them think I was invisible. They had no idea the foundation beneath their fairy tale was already crumbling. When the reception finally ended, I walked out of the kitchen without a word. Past the servers wiping down tables, past the bartenders collecting tips, past the neon sign glowing, "The future is forever." I slipped out the side door into the cool night air. The silence was sharp. It hummed in my ears after hours of muffled music. I took a deep breath. For the first time that day, I felt power stir in my chest. Not joy, not pride, but control. By the time I returned to the hotel, it was nearly midnight. I sat on the stiff bed, still in my dress, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily above me. My shoes pinched, my hair smelled of grease and sweat, and my skin felt like it carried the weight of humiliation itself. But I didn't cry, not once. Instead, I opened my tablet and pulled up the meticulously kept wedding budget. Every expense, every indulgence Emily had demanded under the guise of elevating the event. Handwritten invitations from a boutique vendor in Vermont, a custom neon sign, 5-tier cake instead of 2, signature cocktails, upgraded chairs, candle walls, every check signed by me, every dollar mine. And then, there it was, 2 charges I hadn't authorized, bar tab from a pre-wedding tasting, a rehearsal dinner upgrade, both charged to my card. I scrolled further, my pulse quickening. A Venmo note from Emily to her bridesmaid. His mom's covering everything. Might as well go big. #wedding vibes. The words burned into my eyes. His mom's covering everything. Not Daniel. Not them. Me. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, and for the first time all day, I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel betrayal. I felt nothing. A strange, heavy nothing. The kind that settles in your bones after too much pain when the body decides to shut it all off to survive. I closed the tablet, sat there in the dark, and realized something that made my chest tighten. This wasn't about forgetting me. This wasn't about oversight. This was exploitation. They hadn't just excluded me. They had used me. And when I was no longer useful, they discarded me like a paper napkin on a folding chair. The next morning, the fallout began. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Mom, what happened? The brunch is canceled. The flowers aren't arriving. Margaret, this is so unprofessional. Guests are asking questions. Seriously, was this about the seating? Don't be petty. We had a vision petty. That word cut deeper than the kitchen exile. I stared at the messages, my lips curving into the faintest smile. Because they didn't understand. Not yet. This wasn't petty. This was precise. They had edited me out of their story. I was simply reminding them who held the pen. I turned off my phone, placed it on the nightstand, and lay back on the stiff mattress. My heart no longer raced. My hands no longer shook. Instead, I felt a quiet hum inside me, like an engine turning over after years of silence. For the first time in months, I felt alive. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was decoration, a background prop, a ghost in the kitchen. But I was the one who paid for the fairy tale. And if I could build it, I could burn it down. Not with fire, not with screaming, but with silence. Calculated, controlled silence that would echo louder than any outburst. And in that silence, I realized something important. They weren't the ones teaching me a lesson. I was teaching them. And class had only just begun. The morning sun bled pale gold through the thin curtains of my hotel room. I hadn't slept a single hour. My body felt like stone, my head heavy, but my hands were steady as I packed my things. The wedding dress went into its garment bag. My shoes, still tight and blistering, into their box. The handbag Daniel had once given me on Mother's Day slid into my suitcase. I left the hotel without looking back. The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts louder than the radio. I rolled past familiar streets, houses with blooming rose bushes, front yards trimmed to perfection. The world carried on as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just been erased from the biggest day of my son's life. When I unlocked my front door, the smell of my house hit me. Faint lavender from the detergent, coffee grounds lingering from yesterday, the stale stillness of a place waiting for me to breathe life into it again. I went straight to my bedroom, pulled open the dresser drawer, and found what I hadn't touched in years. A red folder, old, frayed at the edges. Stuffed with paperwork I never had the heart to throw away. Insurance forms, mortgage papers, receipts. And at the bottom, an envelope. Yellowed, fragile. Sealed with a flap that had been pressed down decades ago. My late husband's handwriting stretched across the front. I had found it after his death, but back then I couldn't bear to open it. Grief was already heavy enough. I wasn't strong enough for more. But today, I was. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid the letter out. The paper was thin, his handwriting slanted, familiar. My eyes scanned the first line. "Margaret, I know you never wanted to hear from me again, but there's something you deserve to know." My breath caught. I sat down slowly, the paper shaking in my hands. "Daniel isn't biologically yours." Emily was already pregnant when we got together. I thought I could pretend. I thought love could cover the truth, but it never felt right keeping this from you. The words blurred as tears welled, though none fell. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. I forced myself to keep reading. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. I told myself you'd leave, that you'd never forgive me, but you stayed. You raised him as your own. And even though he isn't yours by blood, he is yours in every way that matters. I pressed the letter to my lap, staring at the wall. Daniel wasn't mine, not by birth, not by blood. A sharp, dizzying wave rushed through me. Memories slammed into my chest. His first steps, the nights I stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes, the years I worked extra shifts for his braces, his asthma medication, his sneakers, his future. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every laugh, every hug. All for a boy who, in the end, hadn't even saved me a seat at his wedding. I should have felt shattered. I should have felt betrayed. But instead, I felt clarity. Because blood had never been the reason I loved him. Blood didn't rock him to sleep. Blood didn't pay for his school trips or bake cakes with chocolate sprinkles when he turned 10. Blood didn't sit in a kitchen on his wedding day, swallowing humiliation so his day wouldn't be ruined. I did. Me. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen by the truth itself. The letter was a wound, yes, but it was also a mirror. It showed me that I had always been more than a placeholder, more than a purse string, more than an afterthought. I had built a life out of loyalty and love, even when neither was returned. And now I knew. Daniel's silence at the wedding wasn't just cruelty. It was history repeating itself. His father had lied, his bride had lied, and he had chosen to let their voices drown out mine. But here's the thing about lies. They rot the foundation. And sooner or later, everything built on top of them crumbles. I folded the letter back carefully, slid it into the red folder, and placed it on the table in plain sight. I wasn't hiding it anymore. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background. My coffee brewed. The air was still. And inside me, something shifted. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even angry. I was awake. Awake to the truth. Awake to the years I had given without asking for anything back. Awake to the woman I had buried beneath motherhood, sacrifice, and silence. The Margaret who had once believed love alone was enough had died in that kitchen at the wedding. The woman sitting here now? She was someone else entirely, and with that letter in my hand, I realized the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The letter didn't break me. It freed me. For years, I had worn invisible chains forged from sacrifice, obligation, and silence, chains polished by words like duty and love, but heavy enough to keep me small. The wedding was just the final tug that showed me how deep they ran. And now, sitting at my own kitchen table with Robert's confession spread before me, I knew I had two choices: stay bound by the past or break the chains. I chose the latter. The first step was symbolic. I walked through the house, collecting every framed photo of Daniel: kindergarten graduation, his first soccer game, high school prom, the college acceptance letter photo where his grin stretched ear to ear. One by one, I took them off the walls and set them in a box, not out of hate, not even out of anger, but because I couldn't keep living in a shrine to a version of motherhood that demanded I disappear. Each frame I removed felt lighter, like a shackle unlocking. I stopped in front of the photo from his 8th birthday, the one where I had baked the lopsided cake myself because I couldn't afford the bakery version. He'd hugged me so tight that day. Tears pricked my eyes, but I whispered, "That was real, and I don't regret it." Then I placed it gently in the box. When the walls were bare, I stood back. The house felt different. Emptier, yes, but also honest, like it was finally mine. The second step was reclaiming my space. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals became something new. I pushed aside Daniel's favorite cereal boxes I'd kept out of habit and stocked the shelves with food I actually enjoyed. Fresh herbs, exotic spices, pasta that wasn't shaped like dinosaurs. That evening, I cooked just for me. Lemon butter pasta with roasted cherry tomatoes and garlic, paired with a glass of red wine. I lit a candle, not for company, not for romance, just because I liked the way it flickered. The first bite was warm and bright, a taste that whispered, "This is your life now." The third step was the hardest, silence. Not the silence of being ignored, dismissed, erased, but chosen silence. The kind that says, "I don't owe you my voice anymore." My phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from Daniel, messages from Emily, even her parents demanding professionalism. I didn't answer. I didn't explain. For once, I let the quiet do the talking, because silence, when chosen, is power. The fourth step was creation. I pulled out a yellow notepad and began writing names. Not family by blood, but family by choice. Claire, my old friend from the ER who used to sneak coffee into my locker when I worked doubles. Mr. Henderson, my neighbor who always shoveled my driveway before I could get to it. Dina, the bookstore clerk who asked about my week every Sunday and actually listened. Nurse Janet, the colleague who once stayed late on her own birthday so I could make it to Daniel's school play. These were my people, my circle, my new family. I invited them for dinner. No chandeliers, no antique whiskey barrels, no elevated decor. Just my table, my food, my terms. On the night of the dinner, my home was filled with laughter, real laughter. The kind that makes your stomach ache and your eyes water, not from politeness, but from joy. We passed plates, shared stories, raised glasses. For the first time in years, I wasn't in the background. I wasn't invisible. I was present, seen, celebrated. As the evening wound down, Claire raised her glass and said softly, "To Margaret, for reminding us it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table." The others clinked their glasses, and I did too, my voice steady as I added, "To finally being free." That night, when I went to bed, the silence in my house felt different. It wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. The chains that had bound me for so long were gone. And for the first time, I wasn't just Daniel's mother. I wasn't Robert's widow. I was me. A woman who had given everything and survived being discarded. A woman who had faced betrayal and found strength instead of despair. A woman who had broken the chains, and I knew this was only the beginning. Legacy. It used to be a word I thought belonged only to men, to politicians, businessmen, fathers who left behind houses and stocks and savings accounts. I never thought about what mine would be. I assumed my legacy was Daniel, that he would carry my sacrifices like a quiet inheritance, proof that I had mattered. But standing in my living room with bare walls and a quiet heart, I realized something earth-shaking. Daniel wasn't my legacy. I was. For so long, I had let my story be written by others. By Robert, with his lies. By Daniel, with his silence. By Emily, with her cruelty. They treated me like a footnote in their grand narratives. But what if I stopped being a footnote? What if I became the author? That thought settled into me like fire in cold bones. The very next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out my notepad again. This time, I didn't write down names of friends for dinner. I wrote ideas, dreams. The kind of dreams I'd buried decades ago when I was too busy working double shifts and clipping coupons to keep food on the table. Foundation for mothers erased by their families. legal support for seniors facing financial abuse, workshops, how to protect yourself when love turns into leverage. I circled the last one twice because I knew what it felt like to be erased. I knew the humiliation of sitting in the kitchen while others toasted with champagne I had paid for. I knew the ache of being treated as disposable, and if I could survive that, maybe I could help someone else survive too. That week, I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor, not the kind Robert used to brag about. Someone different. A woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, sharp-eyed and patient, who didn't talk down to me when I admitted I'd never really invested beyond a savings account. She spread the papers across her office desk, ran the numbers, and finally leaned back with a smile. "Margaret," she said gently, "you're sitting on more than enough to live comfortably. More than enough to build something meaningful." Her words felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Meaningful. Not convenient. Not silent. Meaningful. I left her office with a folder of plans and a new sense of purpose humming in my chest. Within a month, I filed paperwork to start a nonprofit. Small at first, just me, Sarah's guidance, and Claire volunteering her weekends. We called it the Margaret Langley Foundation, dedicated to protecting seniors from financial manipulation by their own families. At first, it was just phone calls and pamphlets, but word spread quickly. I started getting letters, emails, women and men writing to me from across the country. My daughter convinced me to sign over my house. My son drained my bank account and vanished. I thought they loved me, until the money ran out. I read each one, heart aching but steady, because I wasn't just their audience. I was their mirror, and for the first time, I wasn't giving in silence. I was giving in strength. By 6 months, we'd helped over 200 seniors recover stolen funds, cancel fraudulent transfers, and even press charges against abusive relatives. Some called me a savior. I shook my head every time. "I'm not a savior," I'd say. "I'm proof that you can survive it." And fight back. The local paper caught wind, then a state representative, then a national reporter. They all wanted my story. At first, I resisted. I'd spent so long swallowing my pain that speaking it aloud felt impossible. But then I thought of all the mothers still sitting in kitchens, still being erased, still thinking silence was their only option. So I spoke. And once I started, I didn't stop. I told the truth, not just about the wedding, but about the decades that led to it, about the sacrifices unseen, the betrayals endured, and the power I discovered only after being discarded. The story went viral. And suddenly, people who had once whispered pitiful behind my back were saying another word, powerful. One evening, as I closed my laptop after a long day of reading emails from strangers who felt less alone because of me, Claire poured me a glass of wine and asked, "Do you ever miss him? The Daniel you thought you had?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I miss who I believed he was," I admitted, "but I don't miss being the woman I had to become to keep that belief alive." She nodded, and I realized something important. I wasn't grieving Daniel anymore. I was grieving myself, the version of me that had been silenced for too long. And grief, once faced, turns into growth. My legacy wasn't about raising a son who forgot me. My legacy was rewriting what it means to be a mother, a widow, a woman. Not the background, not the purse string, not the kitchen ghost, but the author. And this time, I wasn't writing myself out of the story. I was writing myself in bold, clear, unshakable. The chains were gone. The story was mine. And the legacy, it had only just begun. Life has a way of circling back. Not always in the way you expect, but in the way you need. 6 months after the wedding, I woke up one morning to birdsong outside my window. The sunlight spilled across my quilt in soft golden waves, warm and gentle, not sharp and mocking like the chandeliers at that barn had been. For the first time in years, I felt no weight in my chest. I made coffee, black, strong. I carried it out to the porch where roses bloomed in wild colors, reds and pinks I had planted with my own hands. Their scent drifted in the air, sweet and stubborn, proof that beauty could grow even after being cut back to nothing. That's when it hit me. I had come full circle. I thought back to the night of the wedding, sitting in the kitchen with grease clinging to my hair, humiliation thick in my throat. I had thought it was the end of everything, that the story of my life had closed with a slammed door. But I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because sometimes you have to lose your place at someone else's table before you can finally build your own. The foundation was thriving. My chosen family, Claire, Mr. Henderson, Dina, Janet were fixtures in my life now, their laughter echoing in rooms that once felt hollow. My home wasn't a shrine to the past anymore. It was alive. And me? I wasn't just surviving. I was living. One evening, we hosted another dinner at my house. String lights glowed above the porch, soft music played in the background, and my table was crowded with plates of food I had cooked with joy, not obligation. Between sips of wine and bursts of laughter, I caught myself smiling in a way I hadn't in decades. Not the smile you force for photos, not the polite one you wear to keep the peace, but a real one, bright, unguarded, free. As the night stretched on, Claire raised her glass again, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "To Margaret," she said, "for proving it's never too late to write your own ending." The others clinked glasses, and I raised mine too, steady and strong. Later, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The same kitchen where I had once cried over unpaid bills and burnt casseroles, where I had once felt like nothing more than a servant to other people's needs. Now it was my sanctuary. The silence was no longer heavy, it was peace. That night, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the red folder again. The letters were still there. Robert's confessions, his betrayals written in faded ink. I unfolded them, read them one last time, then set them back down. But this time, they didn't hurt. They didn't define me anymore. They were just words, part of a story I had survived. I realized I didn't need to keep reopening those wounds. The scars were enough proof of what I'd endured. And scars, unlike fresh wounds, don't bleed. They simply remind you how strong you were to heal. So I placed the letters in a box, taped it shut, and carried it to the attic. Not hidden in shame, not destroyed in anger, but stored away as part of a past that no longer ruled me. The next morning, as I watered my roses, a neighbor stopped by. "Margaret," she said softly, "I saw your story on the news. What you're doing, it's inspiring. I wish I had your strength." I smiled. "It's not strength," I told her. "It's choice. The choice to stop waiting for someone else to save you and to save yourself instead." She nodded, eyes shining, and I knew the circle had widened. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had been told to sit quietly in the kitchen while the world celebrated without her. Weeks later, I got a letter from prison. Another one from Victoria. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because forgiveness without change isn't healing. It's surrender. And I had surrendered enough for one lifetime. Instead, I picked up a paintbrush. In my art studio, once Robert's office, now wholly mine, I had been working on a painting, a self-portrait, not of the grieving widow in mauve chiffon, not of the invisible mother with shaking hands, but of the woman I had become. Strong posture, eyes forward, a smile not of bitterness, but of resolve. When I stepped back to look at it, I realized this was my full circle. Not revenge, not regret, but reclamation. I had lost my place at their table only to find my place at my own. I had been erased only to rewrite myself bolder, stronger, louder. And now, when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the ghost in the kitchen. I saw the author of her own story. I saw me, whole, unafraid, unshakable. And finally, That was enough. So here we are. The woman who was erased at her own son's wedding now sits at the head of her own table. Not because they gave her permission, but because she chose herself. I was humiliated, betrayed, discarded. But out of that silence, I built something louder than applause. I built a life, a legacy, a story that no one else can erase. And here's what I want you to take with you. You can give everything, your money, your love, your whole soul, and still be treated like you're invisible. But invisibility is a lie. Your worth is not decided by the seat they give you or the speeches they forget to write. Your worth is decided by the moment you stand up, smile, and say, I choose myself. Because in the end, love is powerful. But boundaries? Boundaries are sacred. And if this story found you today, maybe it's because you too are ready to stop waiting for permission to matter. Maybe you too are ready to take your seat at the head of your own table. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world are you watching from? Because your story matters.